Ford Motor Company, one of the titans of the American auto industry, is known for its innovations, from the Model T to the Mustang. Yet, alongside these successes, the company produced a handful of vehicles whose design flaws and corporate miscalculations led to deadly consequences. Here we explore the top 10 craziest Ford cars that ended up taking American lives, sometimes by the dozens, and often through reckless engineering or cost-cutting decisions.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 10. The 1983 to 1988 Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe was one of Ford's boldest attempts to bring European-style performance into an American Grand Tourer. It combined futuristic design, turbocharged power, and high-tech features, yet beneath the sleek surface lurked a serious stability problem. The Turbo Coupe's front-heavy layout, unpredictable turbo lag, and violent torque steer made it a handful to control, especially for drivers unprepared for its erratic behavior. When the Turbo Coupe debuted in 1983, Ford wanted to reinvent the Thunderbird for a new era. Gone were the massive V8s of the 1970s. Instead, the car used the 2.3-liter turbocharged inline-4 borrowed from the Mustang SVO. On paper, it made sense. Smaller, lighter, and more efficient, with around 142 to 190 horsepower, depending on the year and boost setting. But in practice, that small engine came with a big personality problem. The turbocharged power delivery was brutally uneven. Below 3,000 RPM, it felt sluggish. Then suddenly, the turbo spooled and the car lunged forward violently, often upsetting the chassis. The result? Torque steer, a violent tug of the steering wheel as power went unevenly to the rear wheels through the limited slip differential and soft suspension geometry. On wet or uneven roads, the Turbo Coupe could quickly kick sideways under hard throttle, forcing drivers into rapid, often futile corrections. Ford's goal was to make the Turbo Coupe feel agile and refined, but its balance was off. The car carried a heavy nose, especially with the intercooler and turbo hardware up front, which threw off its weight distribution. Despite rear-wheel drive, the car's handling felt unpredictable. Throttle lag and surge. The turbo's boost came on suddenly, catching drivers off guard mid-corner. Soft rear suspension. On wet pavement, the rear could snap loose when power hit abruptly, leading to spinouts. Overconfidence. With its sport branding, many buyers pushed it harder than the chassis could safely handle, particularly during sharp highway merges or spirited backroad driving. Even seasoned drivers found that the Thunderbird could transition from understeer to oversteer in an instant, especially when boost hit mid-turn, a classic recipe for loss of control. Reports from owners and automotive journalists described the Turbo Coupe as fast but twitchy. Accidents were frequently attributed to boost surprise, the moment when power suddenly surged at mid-range RPMs. On slick roads, the rear tires would lose traction, sending the car spinning, especially during lane changes or hard acceleration. In particular, young or inexperienced drivers, drawn by the car's turbo badging and sporty looks, often found themselves overpowered and overwhelmed. The 2.3-liter engine might have seemed modest compared to V8s, but its sudden torque hit like a hammer. Without the stability systems like traction control or ABS that modern cars rely on today. Fatal accidents weren't uncommon, particularly in wet conditions or when high-speed oversteer caused total loss of control. Ford's engineers envisioned the Turbo Coupe as a sophisticated Grand Tourer, a car that could rival BMWs and Audis of the era with technology like four-wheel disc brakes, adjustable shock absorbers on later models, electronic boost control, digital instrument clusters. Unfortunately, these innovations couldn't hide the fundamental instability caused by poor weight balance and aggressive turbo tuning. Even Motor Trend noted in 1987 that while the Thunderbird was surprisingly fast for its size, its handling punished drivers who underestimated its temper. By the late 1980s, the Turbo Coupe had developed a reputation as a thrilling but dangerous machine. Ford addressed some of the issues in later models, smoothing out power delivery and refining suspension geometry, but the car's image had already been shaped by its erratic early years. Today, enthusiasts remember the Thunderbird Turbo Coupe as a symbol of 1980s excess and experimentation, a car that tried to fuse muscle and modernity, but often delivered chaos instead. Its turbocharged fury made it a standout, but its instability made it infamous. It wasn't just fast, it was volatile, a car that demanded respect every time the boost gauge climbed.
Number 9. The 1974-1976 Ford Elite was marketed as a stylish, upscale, personal luxury coupe, a car that combined Thunderbird flair with midsize affordability. But beneath its glossy paint and vinyl roof hid a serious engineering flaw. Its braking system was dangerously inadequate for its size and weight. At nearly 4,200 pounds, the Elite was one of the heaviest mid-size coupes of its era, yet Ford equipped it with front disc brakes and rear drums, a setup completely mismatched to the car's mass. This poor design decision led to widespread brake fade, rear-end instability, and countless freeway collisions, earning the Elite a quiet but troubling reputation among safety advocates and owners alike. The Elite debuted in 1974 as part of the personal luxury boom, a time when American buyers wanted big, soft-riding two-doors that looked expensive but weren't. Ford achieved this by repackaging the Torino platform, a mid-size chassis, with Thunderbird-inspired styling, hidden headlights, a long hood, opera windows, and a plush interior. It looked the part of a high-end coupe, but mechanically it was a compromise car. Ford simply took the Torino's suspension and brake setup, which had been designed for a lighter, lower-performance sedan, and bolted it onto a car that was 500 to 700 pounds heavier. The result? A luxury tank with an economy car's braking hardware. The Elite used 11.7-inch front discs paired with 9-inch rear drum brakes, the same drum assemblies found on the smaller Ford Grand Torino. On paper, that didn't seem catastrophic, but in real-world driving, the imbalance became obvious. The rear drums overheated quickly, especially during long downhill drives or repeated stops. As heat built up, the rear braking force faded dramatically, forcing the front brakes to absorb nearly all the stopping load. This imbalance created severe nosedive under braking and dangerously long stopping distances, sometimes exceeding 220 feet from 60 miles per hour, among the worst in its class. Drivers reported that the car felt unstable and unpredictable under hard braking. On wet or uneven pavement, the Elite tended to rear-end other vehicles, especially in freeway traffic, where panic stops were common. Internal Ford documents later revealed that the company was aware of what engineers called rear brake bias deficiency. Essentially, the rear brakes weren't contributing enough stopping force to keep the car stable. This poor brake balance meant that the front rotors would overheat and the rear wheels could even lock or fade unpredictably, depending on the surface. Ford dealers quietly performed field fixes, adjusting brake proportioning valves or replacing linings with higher friction materials, but there was never a formal recall. Instead, Ford attributed the issue to owner driving habits and vehicle loading conditions. Yet insurance reports told another story. In California and Michigan, data from 1975 to 1976 showed the Ford Elite had a higher rate of rear-end collisions than any comparable coupe, including the Chevrolet Monte Carlo and Chrysler Cordoba. Contemporary reviews were mixed. Motor Trend, 1975, praised the Elite's comfort and styling, but noted soft, spongy brake feel under repeated use. Owners wrote to consumer magazines complaining that the brakes faded to nothing on long descents and that the pedal went to the floor without stopping the car. Some even recounted frightening incidents where the Elite's rear drums smoked visibly after highway driving in heavy traffic, a clear sign of thermal overload. Ford dealers often replaced brake shoes or cylinders but rarely addressed the root cause. The car's weight simply overwhelmed the braking system. In freeway conditions, where speeds were high and stop distances critical, the Elite's brake fade became a deadly flaw. Reports from NHTA archives and insurance investigations indicated a notable rise in rear-end accidents involving 1974 to 75 Elites. Drivers complained of total loss of braking efficiency after only a few hard stops. Ford quietly improved the system in 1976 by rebalancing the proportioning valve and upgrading front calipers. But the damage was done. The car's reputation for poor stopping power lingered even after production ended. The Elite's failure exposed a critical issue in Ford's 1970s product philosophy, the tendency to recycle outdated components into heavier, flashier models without re-engineering the mechanical fundamentals. The company had assumed that buyers of personal luxury cars prioritized comfort over performance, but that complacency led to real-world safety hazards. When Ford phased out the Elite after 1976, merging it into the new Thunderbird line, the automaker quietly introduced larger rear drums and improved brake proportioning, an unspoken acknowledgement that the Elite system had been dangerously underpowered. Today, the 1974-1976 Ford Elite is remembered less for its style and more for its mechanical shortcomings. Collectors appreciate its vintage looks, but few forget its flawed brake design. It's often cited as an example of form over function engineering, a car built to look luxurious even if that meant cutting corners where it mattered most: safety. In short, the Elite wasn't just a heavy luxury coupe. It was a 2-ton reminder that bad brake balance can turn even a comfortable cruiser into a roadside hazard. Number 8. The 1969-1971 Ford Torino Cobra Jet was a brute in the purest muscle car sense, built for raw, unrestrained speed at a time when safety was an afterthought. It was Ford's answer to the horsepower wars raging between GM and Chrysler, and it came armed with the ferocious 429 Cobra Jet V8, an engine capable of catapulting the Torino past 140 miles an hour. But as fast as it was in a straight line, the car's engineering couldn't keep up with its power. What Ford had created was a high-speed missile with no stability, no safety balance, and no forgiveness, earning it the deadly nickname, the Flying Coffin. The Torino Cobra Jet was born from Ford's obsession with dominating drag strips and NASCAR tracks. At its heart was the 429 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8, available in 2 configurations, the standard CJ and the even wilder Super Cobra Jet SCJ. The SCJ version featured stronger internals, an oil cooler, and a rated output of 375 horsepower, though real-world figures were closer to 420 plus HP. On paper, this made the Torino one of the fastest American muscle cars ever built. Quarter-mile times dipped into the 13-second range, and top speeds exceeded 140 miles an hour, a terrifying figure in an era when suspension geometry, aerodynamics, and brakes were far from adequate. The problem wasn't the engine, it was everything else. At high velocity, the Torino's long hood and flat front fascia became a nightmare of aerodynamic lift. Ford engineers later admitted that the front end generated significant positive pressure, effectively pushing the nose up rather than down. At speeds above 120 miles an hour, test drivers reported steering became dangerously light as the front tires lost road contact. The car felt as if it were floating, requiring constant correction. Crosswinds or uneven pavement could send it drifting unpredictably between lanes. In wind tunnel tests conducted for NASCAR homologation in 1970, Ford engineers discovered that the Torino's front lift coefficient was nearly double that of the Dodge Charger Daytona, a car purpose-built for high-speed stability. This meant that the Torino Cobra Jet wasn't just unstable, it was aerodynamically unsafe beyond legal highway speeds. To handle the Cobra Jet's power, Ford fitted the Torino with heavy-duty springs, wider tires, and front disc brakes. But the car still relied on a basic body-on-frame design and rear drum brakes, inadequate for controlling 4,000 pounds moving at triple-digit speeds.
Drivers described terrifying fade under hard braking. After a few high-speed stops, the pedal would go soft and the front discs would glow red. The rear drums, meanwhile, would often lock up unevenly, sending the car fishtailing under deceleration. Combine this with the poor aerodynamics and you had a lethal recipe, a car that couldn't steer or stop safely at the speeds its engine encouraged. The Cobra Jet's reputation for death-defying performance wasn't just folklore. Police accident reports from 1969 to 1972 in several states, including California and Michigan, recorded a high fatality rate among young male drivers of Torino Cobra Jet models. Street racers often treated the car like a dragster, unaware that above 120 miles an hour, the front-end suspension geometry and aerodynamic lift created near-zero steering control. Survivors of crashes described the car as floating right off the ground, while witnesses recalled Torinos that just kept going straight, no steering, no control, nothing. One Motor Trend test driver even wrote, "At 130 miles an hour, the front end felt airborne. The steering wheel was just for decoration." Ford engineers knew the issue existed, but were under pressure to homologate the car for NASCAR competition before addressing it. In NASCAR, the Torino's instability became a major concern. While Ford's racing team tried to fix it with extended front lips and hood scoops, it wasn't enough. Competitors like Dodge's Daytona and Plymouth Superbird used radical wind tunnel bodies that generated downforce, while the Torino still created lift. Ford's racing team eventually replaced the car with the Torino Talladega, a more aerodynamic evolution designed to correct the Cobra Jet's instability. The Talladega's smoother nose and extended front bumper cured much of the high-speed lift, but by then, the damage was done. The Cobra Jet Torino was effectively banned from further factory high-speed use. Even Ford's own safety division refused to allow stock Cobra Jet Torinos in future internal performance testing without modifications. Ford's engineers had focused entirely on powertrain development, assuming that brute force alone would win sales in races, but they underestimated the impact of aerodynamic lift, weight distribution, and primitive suspension design. At 140 miles an hour, the front end's upward pressure could reach over 400 pounds of lift, enough to partially unload the tires. The steering geometry couldn't maintain alignment under those forces, which meant that a small bump or steering input could send the car spinning. In an era before stability control or even anti-lock brakes, that instability was a death sentence. Today, the 1969-1971 Ford Torino Cobra Jet is remembered as one of the most dangerously overpowered muscle cars ever built. Collectors admire its raw strength and beautiful fastback design, but they also acknowledge the grim reality. This was a car that could outrun its own engineering. Nicknamed the Flying Coffin by racers and journalists alike, the Cobra Jet stood as the ultimate example of the 1970s muscle car excess, a time when Detroit cared more about horsepower numbers than human survival. It remains both a symbol of American speed and a warning from history.
Number 7. The 1952-1956 Ford Customline stands today as a haunting reminder of what driving was like before automotive safety became a serious concern. It was a handsome and reliable family car for post-war America, solidly built, affordable, and dependable. But beneath its charming chrome and pastel colors, the Customline concealed a grim truth. It was one of the most dangerous cars to crash in during the early 1950s. This was the era before crumple zones, collapsible steering columns, or energy-absorbing dashboards. Ford, like most automakers of the time, prioritized styling and cost over safety engineering, with deadly consequences. The Customline was part of Ford's full-size lineup between 1952 and 1956, positioned between the budget main line and the fancier Crest line. It came in sedans, coupes, and wagons, the kind of car you saw parked outside every mid-century suburban home. Under the hood, you'd find a flathead V8 in early models, or later the more powerful Y-block V8 engines producing up to 173 horsepower. By all appearances, it was a solid, honest machine, easy to maintain, comfortable for the time, and sturdy.
But that same sturdiness was exactly what made it deadly in a collision. In the 1950s, car manufacturers advertised rigid all-steel construction as a selling point. Ford bragged about the Customline's solid body shell and strong steering system, claiming it made the car safer and more durable. But physics told a different story. That rigidity meant the Customline did not deform during an impact. All the energy of a crash went straight into the passengers. Instead of absorbing force, the steel structure transferred it directly to the occupants, turning dashboards, steering wheels, and metal trim into lethal projectiles. Crash test images from the mid-1950s, later recreated for safety studies, showed horrifying results. The steering column rammed straight through the driver's chest. The dashboard, made entirely of steel, crushed faces and ribs. The windshield glass, not yet laminated or shatterproof, splintered into razor-sharp shards. In many cases, head-on collisions at just 30 to 40 miles per hour were unsurvivable. Perhaps the most infamous design flaw of the Ford Customline was its rigid steering column. There was no collapsible joint. The column was simply a solid metal shaft connected directly to the steering box and bolted into the dashboard. In a front-end collision, the column would be driven straight backwards into the driver's chest or face. Safety researchers in the 1960s later used the Customline in demonstrations because the results were so graphic and undeniable. In several early crash test photographs from Ford's own archives and later the Cornell Aeronautical Laboratory, you can see the steering wheel bent inward, the rim jammed into the seat back. A chilling testament to how many drivers were impaled during real-world crashes. This design persisted until 1959, when Ford finally introduced collapsible steering columns, after years of fatal outcomes and rising public awareness. Unlike later padded dashboards, the Customline's interior was entirely metal. The dash was made of stamped steel, painted in glossy enamel. In a collision, the human body, traveling forward at 30 miles per hour or more, met that unyielding surface with catastrophic force. Injuries often included massive skull fractures from head impact, facial disfigurement from contact with knobs, switches, and the radio, internal bleeding caused by hitting the steering wheel hub. Even minor accidents could cause life-altering trauma because there were no seatbelts or energy-absorbing materials anywhere in the cabin. Seatbelts were still considered optional equipment, and most Customlines didn't have them. The few that did were usually installed by cautious owners or aftermarket suppliers. Ford didn't begin offering factory-installed seatbelts until 1955, and even then, they were poorly marketed. Meanwhile, the Customline's frame was a solid ladder design that refused to bend. That might sound strong, but it meant the car itself absorbed almost none of the crash energy. The result was catastrophic deceleration trauma for anyone inside. By contrast, Volvo and Saab in Europe were already experimenting with crumple zones and safety cages, concepts that would take American manufacturers almost another decade to adopt. Ford's marketing department at the time was oblivious to or dismissive of these dangers. Advertisements proudly proclaimed that Ford builds them solid and you feel safe in a Ford. In reality, that safe feeling came from weight and size, not engineering. Drivers felt secure because the Customline looked and felt strong, but physics proved otherwise. The same rigidity that made the doors close with a reassuring thunk also made them impossible to open after a crash. Rescue crews often had to cut victims out because the structure buckled in unpredictable ways, trapping passengers inside twisted steel. The 1952-1956 Ford Customline became an important case study in the evolution of automotive safety. By the late 1950s, researchers like Dr. Hugh DeHaven and Ralph Nader cited cars like the Customline as proof that Detroit's obsession with power and styling came at the cost of human life. In the 1960s, when the U.S. government began forming the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, early crash tests using Customlines and similar 1950s sedans provided stark visual evidence for the need for collapsible steering columns, padded interiors, and seatbelt mandates. Today, safety experts refer to cars like the Customline as the last of the pre-safety dinosaurs. In hindsight, the Customline represents a pivotal contradiction in automotive history. A car celebrated for its durability, but remembered for its lethality. It was the product of an optimistic America that hadn't yet realized how deadly everyday driving could be. Classic car enthusiasts today appreciate its styling and post-war charm, the two-tone paint, chrome trim, and smooth V8. But they also know it's a car best admired from the outside. In a crash, it offered almost no protection at all. The 1952-1956 Ford Customline is a beautiful yet brutal reminder of an era before safety mattered, when steering columns impaled drivers, dashboards became weapons, and solid steel construction was both a selling point and a death sentence.
Number 6. The 1970 to 1975 Ford Maverick Grabber was marketed as a budget-friendly performance coupe for the youth market, light, fast-looking, and cheap to insure. But beneath its sporty stripes and aggressive name lay a car that was dangerously unbalanced, both in engineering and in road behavior. Police officers, insurance agencies, and even Ford's own internal memos would later acknowledge what many young drivers found out the hard way. The Maverick Grabber was a thrill-seeker's trap, a compact car that punished inexperience with fatal consequences. The Ford Maverick debuted in 1970 as Ford's answer to rising import competition, especially the VW Beetle and Toyota Corona. It was meant to be a small, efficient, and stylish alternative to the big sedans of the late 1960s. When the Grabber package arrived later that year, it added a dose of flash. Dual racing stripes, hood scoops, mostly decorative, sport mirrors, and optional V8 power. The name Grabber was supposed to capture youth excitement, a car that could grab attention and speed. But while it looked like a muscle car, it didn't have the engineering to back up that attitude. The Maverick Grabber shared its underpinnings with the old Ford Falcon, a simple rear-wheel drive platform originally designed in the 1960s. That meant it had a solid rear axle, soft coil spring front suspension, and no modern weight distribution engineering. When paired with Ford's optional 302 cubic inch or 5-liter V8, the car suddenly became nose-heavy, while the lightweight rear end had almost no traction. On dry pavement, this made for a tail-happy, fishtailing ride. On wet or icy roads, it was lethal. Drivers would lose rear traction with almost no warning, especially during highway lane changes or sudden braking. Police reports from several states in the early 1970s note a sharp rise in single-car spinouts and rollovers involving Mavericks and Grabbers, most of them involving drivers under 25. By 1973, law enforcement in parts of California and Ohio had begun calling it a beginner's coffin. The Grabber's target market, young men looking for affordable performance, overlapped perfectly with the demographic most likely to push the car beyond its limits. Insurance companies noticed. By 1972, several national insurers had placed the Grabber variant in their high-risk compact category, along with the Chevy Nova SS and Dodge Dart Swinger. Unlike those rivals, however, the Maverick lacked the stability and chassis refinement to handle spirited driving. Police accident investigators frequently cited oversteer on wet roads, loss of control during acceleration, and spinouts from sudden throttle input. In one Michigan safety report from 1974, the Maverick Grabber was labeled as dangerously light in the rear and unpredictable under speed. Despite the Grabber name, most Mavericks weren't truly fast. The base engine was a 200 cubic inch inline-six with about 120 horsepower. Even the V8 versions rarely broke 150 HP after emissions equipment was added in the mid-1970s. The problem wasn't raw speed, it was the car's false sense of capability. Ford marketed it as a fun, sporty car that could handle like a Mustang in a smaller package. Young drivers took that message to heart. But the Maverick's narrow track, poor suspension tuning, and outdated steering system made it dangerously twitchy. The short wheelbase amplified this instability. When the rear tires lost grip, the car could snap into oversteer instantly, leaving no time to recover. The Maverick Grabber was designed before modern crash safety standards took hold. It had no crumple zones, minimal side protection, and no headrests in many early models. Seatbelts were optional until 1972, and even then, most owners didn't use them. Worse still, the steering column remained non-collapsible in early production years. In serious front-end collisions, drivers were often impaled or fatally injured by steering wheel intrusion. Accident reports from 1970 to 1975 show a disproportionately high rate of fatal head injuries and ejections in Maverick crashes compared to similarly sized cars from GM and Chrysler. Another critical flaw was the Maverick's thin-gauge steel construction. Designed to be light and cheap, the body lacked structural reinforcement around the A-pillars and floor pan. In side impacts, the cabin would often collapse inward. A 1974 internal Ford safety review, later referenced in Nader's auto safety updates, noted the Maverick's poor side impact integrity and weak door latch design, issues that could cause doors to pop open during collisions. By 1975, the Maverick Grabber had lost its appeal. Younger buyers moved on to Japanese compacts that actually handled better, while older buyers dismissed it as unsafe and outdated. Ford quietly discontinued the Grabber after the 1975 model year, though the base Maverick continued briefly until 1977. When the car finally left production, few mourned its passing. It had already developed a reputation for instability, cheap build quality, and dangerous handling. In the world of 1970s American cars, the Maverick Grabber stands out not for performance or design, but for how it fooled an entire generation of young drivers into believing it was sporty, when it actually was a mechanical time bomb on wet pavement. The 1970 to 1975 Ford Maverick Grabber combined the worst traits of 1960s engineering with 1970s marketing hype: an unsafe suspension, poor traction, and deceptive speed appeal. What was sold as a fun, youthful ride too often became a deadly lesson in automotive physics.
Number 5. The 1963-1965 Ford Falcon Sprint is a classic example of early American automakers trying to shoehorn muscle into a compact car and failing spectacularly. Marketed as a small, sporty alternative to the larger Galaxies and Fairlanes, the Falcon Sprint offered a combination of affordability, style, and performance appeal. But underneath its youthful looks lurked a dangerous mismatch between engine power and chassis capability, leading to accidents, injuries, and a reputation that still haunts early muscle car enthusiasts. The Falcon Sprint was Ford's response to the emerging desire for smaller, lighter cars with more performance potential, a precursor to the pony car craze that would explode with the Mustang in 1964. Key features of the Sprint package included standard inline-six or optional 260 cubic inch V8, producing about 164 to 170 horsepower. Lightweight, compact body with a short wheelbase of roughly 111 inches. Sporty touches, special badges, stripes, and bucket seats. On paper, it seemed perfect, a small car with enough punch to excite drivers. But the Falcon's chassis was never designed for that much torque. The Falcon was originally designed as a lightweight economy car. The Sprint's V8 option introduced significantly more torque and vibration than the frame could safely handle. Early reports and internal Ford engineering memos documented twisting of the unibody under acceleration, especially during hard launches or cornering, cracked welds along the floor pan, suspension mounts, and A-pillars. Steering columns often shifted slightly, creating a dangerous loss of directional control at speed. Essentially, the car's skeleton was not reinforced to handle muscle car level stress, making it prone to mechanical failures. Enthusiasts who attempted spirited driving were sometimes met with steering lockups, broken mounts, or even partial collapse of suspension components. Perhaps the Falcon Sprint's most notorious safety flaw was steering instability under load.
The combination of a lightweight front end and a powerful V8 caused torque steer during acceleration, pulling the wheel to one side. Loss of precision, particularly on wet or uneven surfaces. Steering box misalignment due to chassis flex, sometimes resulting in a temporary or total loss of steering. In one documented case from 1964, a dealer test vehicle exhibited front-end shuddering and steering play when tested with the V8 at full throttle, a warning Ford chose to ignore in marketing materials. The Falcon's leaf spring rear suspension was tuned for economy, not power. Add a V8, and the lightweight rear end became unpredictable, especially under hard cornering. The car's short wheelbase amplified oversteer tendencies, making it easy for novice drivers to lose control. Insurance claims and police reports from 1963 to 1965 show a disproportionate number of single-car accidents involving high-speed spinouts, often on suburban streets or small highways where drivers assumed they could handle the compact car. The Falcon Sprint is a cautionary tale of the perils of shoehorning power into a weak chassis. Unlike the Mustang or Chevrolet Corvair Corsa that would follow, the Sprint was an experiment in compact muscle that hadn't yet solved the engineering problems. Young drivers were attracted to its size and low insurance costs, but the car's under-engineered frame and inadequate suspension often punished inexperience with mechanical failure or loss of control accidents. Torque-induced chassis twisting cracked welds. Steering columns and mounts could fail under stress. Rear suspension instability led to sudden oversteer. Many early muscle car fans learned the hard way that the Falcon Sprint was not ready for serious performance, even though it looked and sounded ready. Despite its flaws, the Falcon Sprint had an important historical role. It helped Ford understand the limitations of compact chassis with high-output engines, directly influencing the development of 1964 Mustang. Collectors today prize surviving Falcons for their rare V8 engines and early muscle car pedigree, but safety-conscious enthusiasts know that these cars were meant to be admired, not pushed to their mechanical limits. In retrospect, the Falcon Sprint is a bridge between economy and muscle, an early attempt at a performance compact that was visually exciting but structurally immature, a car where enthusiasm often exceeded engineering reality.
Number 4. The Ford Ranch Wagon of the 1950s is a grim reminder of just how far automotive safety has come. Marketed as a practical, family-friendly station wagon, it carried an idealized vision of suburban life: Sunday drives, grocery runs, and beach trips. But beneath its polished wood-trimmed exterior, it was a mechanical and structural hazard, especially in rear-end collisions. The Ranch Wagon was built on Ford's full-size passenger car platform, which meant heavy steel construction, adding durability, but also deadly momentum in crashes. Long wheelbase and high center of gravity, increasing rollover risk when cornering sharply or during evasive maneuvers. Rear-mounted fuel tank, common in early wagons, positioned just behind the rear axle. Safety considerations were minimal. No seatbelts in the early 50s. Lap belts were optional later in the decade. Rigid steering columns extended directly into the driver's chest with no collapsible mechanism. No padded dashboards or head restraints, leaving occupants vulnerable to blunt force injuries in collisions. Rear-end vulnerability. The combination of steel-heavy body and rear-mounted fuel tank was a disaster in collisions. Even moderate rear impacts could puncture the tank, leading to fires or explosions. Entire families were sometimes trapped inside while the car ignited. Steering column hazards. In head-on collisions, the non-collapsible steering column often penetrated the driver's body, causing fatal chest injuries. Reports from the 1950s and 60s documented multiple deaths where the steering wheel became a spear-like projectile. Children often rode unrestrained on the rear bench, increasing fatalities in collisions. Rear-hinged suicide doors in some models increased the risk of ejection during crashes. The lack of crumple zones meant the entire force of a collision was transmitted to the occupants rather than absorbed by the structure. Rollover risk. Station wagons like the ranch wagon were tall, heavy, and prone to tipping during emergency maneuvers, especially when loaded with passengers and cargo. Even minor swerving could lead to a catastrophic rollover. While precise national statistics from the 1950s are sparse, anecdotal reports and insurance records show a pattern. Families involved in rear-end collisions in full-size wagons, like the ranch wagon, often suffered fatal injuries far beyond what would occur in smaller sedans. The vehicle's popularity ironically exposed more families to risk, since suburban expansion encouraged long daily drives. Pediatric injuries, burns from fuel-fed fires, and fatalities from steering column penetration were common enough that early safety advocates, including Ralph Nader, cited station wagons as examples of vehicles designed for comfort but not safety. In short, the 1950s Ford ranch wagon was a rolling suburban dream with a deadly reality, combining all the charm of family motoring with the lethality of early automotive design. A stark reminder of why safety innovations like seatbelts, collapsible steering columns, and crumple zones became essential in the decades that followed.
Number 3. The Ford Ltd. Crown Victoria, 1980 to 1991, was a quintessential full-size American sedan. Massive, comfortable, and a mainstay of family, fleet, and police service. But beneath its reputation for reliability and presence lay a pre-airbag era death trap. With a hard, angular interior, outdated safety features, and a 2-ton-plus body, it could easily transform a routine collision into a fatal event. The Ltd. Crown Victoria was built on Ford's Ford Panther platform, which underpinned many full-size sedans of the era. Key characteristics: front engine, rear-wheel drive layout. Massive size, curb weight often exceeded 4,000 pounds for the sedan version. Hard-edged interiors, angular dashboards, metal steering columns, and non-energy absorbing surfaces. Standard safety equipment was minimal. Seatbelts were fitted, but pre-tensioners and modern lap shoulder combinations were rare. No airbags until the mid-1990s redesign. Collapsible steering columns were optional on early models, leaving drivers vulnerable. Interior as a death chamber. In a head-on collision, the driver and front passenger were often slammed into the rigid dashboard and steering column. Even when seatbelts were worn, the sharp-edged controls, metal bezels, and steering wheel hubs frequently caused fatal chest, head, and rib injuries. Steering column and dash design. Early 1980s models featured non-collapsible or partially collapsible columns, which could drive the steering wheel into the chest in severe collisions. Combined with the large dash assembly, the front cabin became a metal box of trauma. Weight versus stopping power. The Crown Victoria's V8 engines and heavy body created a momentum problem. Drum brakes on many early models were prone to fade during repeated stops, and ABS was not standard until later years. This led to long stopping distances, making collisions more likely at highway speeds. Lack of crumple zones. While the Panther platform was strong, it transmitted much of the crash energy directly into the passenger cabin rather than absorbing it. Unlike smaller cars with engineered crumple zones, the Ltd. Crown Victoria could crush occupants in otherwise survivable collisions. Paradoxically, the Crown Victoria's reputation for durability made it a popular police and taxi car. Its massive size offered a feeling of security, but statistics revealed that fleet drivers were not immune to fatal injuries, particularly in head-on or rear-impact collisions. Police testing in the 1980s frequently warned that the car's weight, torque, and lack of modern restraint systems made high-speed maneuvers dangerous. Yet the car remained a fleet favorite due to reliability, low maintenance costs, and sheer interior space. The 1980 to 1991 Ford Ltd. Crown Victoria represents the peak of old-school American full-size sedans before modern safety regulations reshaped interiors. Heavy, rigid body construction that transmitted crash energy to occupants. Dashboard and steering column design that could turn low to moderate collisions deadly. Overconfidence induced by size and weight, often resulting in higher-risk driving behavior. For safety historians, the LTD Crown Victoria serves as a cautionary example of pre-airbag sedans, a vehicle built for comfort and presence, but whose cabin design left human bodies highly vulnerable.
Number 2. The Ford Pinto Cruising Wagon, 1977 to 1980, was essentially a whimsical, visually fun station wagon variant of the infamous Pinto, featuring vinyl roof graphics, faux wood panels, and quirky interior touches. But beneath the playful styling, it retained the Pinto's core design flaw: a rear-mounted fuel tank positioned perilously close to the rear bumper, making even minor rear-end collisions potentially fatal. The platform? Subcompact Ford Pinto chassis. Light and nimble, but structurally weak. Engine? 1.6-liter or 2.0-liter inline-4, producing minimal power. Enough for daily driving, but nothing performance-oriented. Safety equipment? Minimal. Lap belts were standard, shoulder belts optional. No airbags. Design cues? Van-like graphics, wood-grain decals, and playful trim meant to appeal to young families or suburban buyers. The Pinto's core problem was engineered compromise. Ford located the gas tank behind the rear axle and just ahead of a thin, unreinforced rear sheet metal panel. Even low-speed collisions could puncture the tank, allowing gasoline to spill into the crumpled metal cabin. Ignite sparks from impact, electrical shorting, or exhaust proximity. Turn minor fender benders into full-blown fires, sometimes trapping occupants. The cruising wagon's added weight from interior trim and faux van panels did little to improve crash survivability. In fact, it could slightly increase rear-end energy transfer, worsening potential fires. Dozens of Pinto rear-end collisions in the 1970s resulted in deaths or severe burns. Internal Ford memos revealed that the company knew reinforcing the tank and redesigning the rear structure would increase costs, so they opted to accept the risk and budget for lawsuits, famously revealed in the 1977 Mother Jones investigation. The cruising wagon trim didn't change the risk, it merely made the car look more suburban appropriate while retaining its fatal flaw. The Pinto cruising wagon stands as a stark example of styling and marketing triumphing over engineering ethics. It's remembered less for its graphics and more for the human cost of design shortcuts, cementing the Pinto's place in automotive infamy.
Number 1. The Ford Capri RS 2600, 1970 to 1974, was Ford Europe's ambitious attempt to create a sporty, affordable European muscle car, often dubbed the European Mustang. Sleek, low-slung, and aggressively styled, it was meant to deliver performance, handling, and style in a compact package. However, its U.S. import versions developed a serious and sometimes fatal safety issue: sudden rear brake lockup, which turned what should have been a nimble sports coupe into a high-speed hazard. Vehicle overview. Engine: 2.6-liter Cologne V6, producing roughly 125 to 150 horsepower. Lightweight, high revving, perfect for spirited driving. Suspension: front McPherson struts, rear live axle, tuned for performance but less forgiving than modern independent setups. Weight: around 2,300 pounds. Light, which enhanced acceleration but amplified instability under brake failure. U.S. import changes. Some Capri RS 2600s shipped with slightly different brake hydraulics to meet American standards, but these modifications occasionally caused rear brake lockups at highway speeds. Rear brake lockup hazard. Unpredictable handling. When the rear brake seized under heavy braking, the car's light rear end would snap sideways, causing spinouts even in skilled hands. Drivers often had no warning before the rear end lost traction. High-speed risk. Many accidents occurred on U.S. freeways where drivers attempted emergency stops. The car's lightweight frame combined with sudden lockup made it nearly impossible to recover once a spin began. Design limitations. Original European hydraulic systems were marginally more forgiving. American import modifications compromised brake balance, increasing rear lockup propensity. Limited safety features, no ABS, no traction control, minimal seatbelt standards. HR. The RS 2600 was marketed in the US during the early 1970s, a time when enthusiasts were drawn to small pony cars with European handling. Despite its attractive styling and performance potential, insurance claims and accident reports noted a pattern of rear brake lockup leading to spinouts, particularly on wet roads or during panic stops. Ford eventually issued guidance to modify brake bias for safer handling in U.S. models, but by then, several accidents had already tarnished the car's reputation in the American market. Brainy. The Capri RS 2600 remains a coveted classic in Europe, celebrated for its design, motorsport heritage, and driving engagement. In the US, however, it serves as a cautionary tale of imported performance cars and their adaptation flaws. Stylish and fun, but safety modifications were incomplete. Rear brake lockup turned spirited driving into an unpredictable hazard. Collectors today love its rarity, but enthusiasts remember that even a light tap on the brakes could start a dangerous spin. The RS 2600 is remembered as the European Mustang that could bite back, thrilling in design and speed, but unforgiving when its flawed brake system failed.